Hello, and welcome to another episode of. Today, I had the chance to catch my friend and ex colleague Rob Giusti while he was in town for a real fireside chat. We are going to talk about design research, technology, and human behaviors and how we interact with complex systems. Rob is a design research associate manager at Accenture's as a doc in Dublin, Ireland. So let's fire it up. Hello, Rob. How are
Hey,
you doing?
good.
Good. It's nice to have you with us while you are in town.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what you do?
Yeah, so currently I'm the Associate Manager of Design Research at Accenture, the DOC, which is Accenture's global research and development hub. A lot of the research that I do is focused on kind of understanding human behavior and and really the implications of technology on like how it impacts um, human behavior and the kind of interactions and experiences.
So that's why you talk a lot about design research, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And the research in the world of design. I was asking myself this question the other day. I was like, when did this become sort of like a staple moment in the design process? But now it's really a crucial part of the overall design process. Did you see a shift in your career of how this is taking more space in the process?
Oh, it's a good question, Zav. I mean, like, I started in architecture. You know that. Like, I started kind of in architecture. And in architecture, I was doing a lot of public consultation. So I wasn't necessarily doing the working drawings or, the kind of classic role of an architect as a designer. I was more kind of facilitating public engagement to understand user requirements. And in my opinion, that's essentially, a component of design research.
Right.
Trying to understand human behavior, human needs, kind of human desires, to then create a program that responds to,
Right.
to those and effectively make better spaces for people.
Yeah.
And I don't know where the shift came from. When I was younger in my design career, I didn't hear as much about design research either. But now there are so many different streams of design research that there's even different names for them, right?
Absolutely.
My role is a manager of design research, but if you look at roles across other organizations, there's UX research, there's data discovery, there's even separation of qualitative and quantitative researchers, and
Yeah.
you get into such detailed nuance. It's quite interesting to see how it's evolving and how it's differentiating itself also from marketing research.
Do you work with designers?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. And we also work with engineers and software engineers, analytics experts, etc.
Yeah.
So it's not just designers. Also,
You run the Institute Without Boundaries for a while, and so I believe that interdisciplinary process in design is something that is dear to you. How are you seeing this in your field? Is that ingrained in an everyday process? We don't even mention it anymore, or do you still think that it needs to be encouraged?
yeah, you know what? I think that where I am right now, it's completely integrated into our workflows, and so even though there are some aspects of those workflows in terms of software engineering, analytics, kind of business strategy and design that are somewhat isolated, we work together as an integrated team, and so that's what I've been doing for the past 2 years while at Accenture the Doc, and I really think that in order to have effective design research, you need to bring people along in the process. You need to bring the client along. You need to bring the software analytics teams and engineers along, because it not only helps them understand, but it also helps them empathize with users
Right.
in a different way.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, without that empathy, you might get conflict within the team to say, hey, we think that this is the proper engineering solution, but does it really respond to the user needs, or does it really respond to what's coming out of that user research that's being conducted?
You can't I mean, it's not saying you, but we cannot be experts at everything.
No, of course not.
So how do you deal with that? Like, do you sometimes, like, do you bring, as we were saying, bringing people to the team? Do you have a core team, but you bring experts to reinforce the team, whether it's like I'm thinking about even like psychology or these kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely, of course. And I think, I'm not a trained psychologist, for instance. A lot of design people that end up in design research actually do come from those kind of sociology backgrounds and have quite deep knowledge of human behavior and understand kind of the triggers that enable or the mindset that enables human interaction or that underpins the human interaction. And I absolutely think that we obviously engage a number of subject matter experts throughout our work, and whenever I'm kind of thrown into a new project, like right now this week I've been helping a colleague with a piece on conversational AI. I don't know that much about conversational AI, and so for me to learn about conversational AI, my first instinct is to contact other people who are experts in that field.
So Fenêtres is about interfaces, and I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by understanding how different systems interact with each other. Not just interact, but interconnect as well with each other and with us human beings in the middle of all this. And then so with the systems becoming more and more complex, and the technology that is needed to run those systems becoming more complex. I wanted to have your take on that, because I know you deal a lot with AI.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you see? What do you see out there?
I mean, these systems are extremely complex, and so are the organizations that are adapting them. And so, a lot of times what we see is clients coming to us that are trying to adopt AI solutions for a particular problem area or to, augment a particular process within an organization. But from a systems perspective, it's also about understanding, the upstream and downstream impacts of this. And so as a design researcher, typically what we're trying to do is understand, first of all, what are the root causes and pain points that we're addressing with this technology? And then from a broader systems impact perspective, like what are the implications of that upstream and downstream? And so when you implement this technology, like what does that do for the workforce that has to interact with it? And what does it do for the organizational processes that also interact with that particular process? And so you get these quite kind of deep systems maps that are actually quite hard to unravel. There's that classic example from Yellowstone National Park where they reintroduced the wolves into the park, and by doing so, it kind of, it changed these cyclical loops or these reinforcing loops within the ecosystem that actually allowed for more biodiversity rather than less.
Right.
And this is a classic example of how you can then use that type of diagrammatic process, even though that's a very natural process. You can use it on a more artificial process to understand what are the causal loops in the system, how can we intervene within those causal loops to have a more meaningful output, and what is the implications of that.
Right. I'm asking more and more the question about visible interfaces and invisible interfaces. Modern times of Chaplin, where the interface is super visible with the levers and the dials, and he even goes into the machine. So the engineers who designed those machines were the ones who designed the interfaces because they understood how the machine worked. And then it evolved from human-machine interaction to human-computer interaction, still understanding. But nowadays, with the advent of AI, are we capable of still understanding how the systems work and being able to design those interfaces that will allow us to interact with the systems? Or is there going to be a part of invisibility that we won't be able to master?
Yeah, it's a good question to have. Like, sometimes I ask myself this question: is like, how much of the system do we need to expose in order to make the interaction meaningful, or to make the interaction functional in a way? And I think in some instances, you don't necessarily need to expose the underlying logic of the system in order to create a meaningful interaction.
Right.
And in other instances, you do need to, you absolutely do need to expose that underlying logic, either for privacy concerns or for, other reasons that enable, a human's understanding of the process that went into it. So you enable kind of a contextual understanding,
Right.
or give them a better situational awarenesses. I think we're always trying to balance, like, what's the most meaningful human experience that we can create, the most intuitive human experience, like what affordance are we giving them with artificial intelligence that they may not have had previously, and also, how do we ensure that it's also ethical, and that it, that people can understand it if they need to understand it, particularly in making a crucial decision. Like we talk about this when we talk about, like complex systems failure, and this idea of normal accidents, like what is the threshold of normal accident that we can allow before it becomes detrimental to either humans or environment or organization or whatever that might be.
There's any big trends out there that you are seeing that are being manifested by the executives in those firms, that what they're interested in, what they want to know, what's next? Do you see anything out there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we've had a lot of internal conversations around, this idea of adaptive systems,
right?
And what is an adaptive system? Like, what does that mean and I think we've been having this conversation at different levels of organizations also. So at the interaction level, there's an adaptive system. So you're starting to see, for instance, your Gmail, when you don't answer an email, it's pushing it to the top of it's prioritizing it for you. So it's saying you haven't answered an email in 5 days.
Yeah.
It's nudging you towards some interaction. So it's prioritizing knowledge for you. That's a level of adaptation. But then you get into the process layer of an organization. And so when you think about processes, they're much more complex. And if you start to have adaptive processes, if they're adapting either to, efficiency or behavior or some other modification mechanism, situational context, whatever that might be, you have another layer of complexity, because then it has to also interact with other processes.
Right.
And so you might have adaptation that becomes detrimental to the other processes. And that's where you need these kind of interoperable systems. And I think this is where a lot of organizations are having challenges, is in that interoperability. And that's where you're seeing, like, all these cloud service platforms emerging, because they're all trying to solve interoperability.
Yeah.
They're trying to solve that seamlessness.
As a designer, and especially as an interaction designer, I'm very, very, very aware of the great divide in accessibility to technology, and I'm not being very optimistic about it. And I'm hoping there's going to be a middle somewhere where one can still have access to a large number of services with the minimum required. Do you encounter this type of questions and topics in what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's always a technological barrier when we look at the implementation of technology systems into organizations. And I think this is where design researchers play an extremely meaningful role in how you navigate that that barrier, and how you make systems that are more accessible for users or more accessible for the general public. But again, like, going back to what you're saying, I think even in the design world, there's a lot of, traditionally trained designers who are now working in technology systems. And, it's not necessarily that you need to understand, for instance, how an algorithm is created, but the capabilities of that algorithm and the limitations of that algorithm are quite important to understand. And so, I'm not sure how that digital divide gets bridged, but obviously education plays a huge role.
Well, that's actually, you are tapping into my last question already. It's like looking at the future, and especially the future of education, of design education. Do you see a greater need in your practice for designers that do have a deeper than usual understanding of technology?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, there is an area for designers that have a deep understanding of technology and have a deep understanding, particularly of data. And I think data literacy is extremely important. On the other side, I also think that ethical literacy is as equal, or if not of greater importance, to teach students, because of the implications of these systems and the amount of users that are interacting with systems on a daily basis. Like, you can have a huge impact on society right now with in a very small role, actually, which is I think different than in previous eras, but again, like, understanding human behavior is also important. And I think a lot of designers coming from kind of sociology or anthropology backgrounds also are playing a really meaningful role in the technology, without having that kind of breadth and depth of deep technical or software engineering knowledge.
Well, thank you very much, and hope to catch you next time you're in town.
Yeah.
Bye-bye, Rob.
See you, Zab. Weird times. Yeah, it's nice to chat.